So I just want to give a brief introduction on ASLA's Committee Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, also known as JEDI. We started this committee in response to George Floyd's protests in the United States. And we saw a need for these four topics to be included in our chapter's mission. And so with intention and commitment, we're continued to learning about meaningful change, and we embrace and enact ideals that foster these ideals of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion within our Northern California chapter of ASLA, the local community, and the broader field of landscape architecture. And so it is myself, Michelle, we have Yuki, and we have Laura. We are hosting this today, and also along with Sam. And Yuki will be presenting our participants with the topics. And take it away, Yuki.
Thank you, everybody, for joining today for our Designing for Neurodiversity panel discussion. We're excited to host this event today. So just a brief structure of this webinar. Today we're joined by a number of industry leaders on this topic. So we will have very brief presentations by each person just to get our minds prepped for this this topic. For those who are more interested in the topic and have had their own research, we're joined by industry leaders, and they can share their experience. So after that, we'll have a discussion section. So please feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat. At the bottom of the Zoom window, there should be a chat button. You can add it there. So today we are joined by Sarah Oppenheisen, who's a designer at HOK, Macy Nelson, who is a designer and podcaster, joining us from Cleveland, Ohio, April Ream, a landscape designer with a city and regional planning background, who is joining us today from Greenville, South Carolina. Ryan Bowe, who is an architect at Smith Group. Today, Tony Candido was planning to join us today, but she could not attend. She is a landscape designer also at Smith Group, and will be or have collaborated with Ryan for this presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand this off to Ryan, who will be sharing a presentation of what that he did, and also Tony.
Thank you, Yuki. So my name is Ryan Bowe. I joined Smith Group about 1.5 years ago, in part because I was really intrigued by Smith Group's vision statement of designing building a better future, and who is that future for, and is that future inclusive? And so neurodiversity is kind of a topic that is near to my heart. My sons were diagnosed, I had twin boys. My sons were diagnosed when they were 18 months. And this picture in the lower right-hand corner used to be our living room. And we had in-home therapies during the pandemic, and they were going between kind of room to room. And we found that the hallway was the space where the transitions happened, were also where kind of the meltdowns and a lot of different kind of self-injury happened, because they struggled with the transition space. And so during the pandemic, we gave them our living room, and about 2 weeks in, our in-home therapist said, we just want to thank you guys for doing that. Their progress has shot through the roof. And so literally that day I typed in, architecture and autism. There's got to be a connection between, our ability to thrive within space and the connection between that. So today we'll be talking about kind of neurodiversity and biophilic design. So neurodiversity is kind of an all-encompassing term that really just defines the intrinsic variations between our kind of cognitive and kind of intellectual needs. It's all encompassing between autism, dyslexia, ADHD, Parkinson's, kind of all sorts of different things, and then also just the varying degrees that we have sensory needs and kind of spatial needs as well. And so biophilic design, actually the connection of nature is a really integral part of our ability to kind of self-regulate naturally. So biophilic design is a practice of incorporating nature into architecture. It's a concept used within the building industry to increase occupant connectivity to the natural environment through the use of direct nature, indirect nature, spatial, and place conditions. Biophilic design also has been proven very therapeutic for neurodivergent autistic individuals by transforming a world that was once chaotic and negative to a world that is supportive and inclusive by providing calming and safe spaces through natural elements. So kind of looking at the different spectrums of sensory needs and sensory design, you've got hypersensitive design and hyposensitive. So there's hypersensitive sensory defensive individuals, so they generally experience sensory overload in various environments. And then you have individuals that are sensory seekers. So they really look for, they're generally understimulated. So they're seeking out sensory experiences that offer kind of play, contrast, and movement. And the amazing connection between both of those environments is that plants and biophilic design is actually therapeutic for both ends of the sensory need spectrum. So this was some input that we had on a project currently that I collaborated with Tony on and Todd Coley that's on the call as well. And this is looking at direct kind of user family input and kind of responses to questions. So one was there's a green archway, can it be accessible to everyone? How can patient art be included in the design? Design for my child with autism. I love the incorporation of lighting design, enclose the meditation space. I think somebody's not muted. And then there's notes about adding a decompression hut. So what's really interesting is our users of hospitals and hospitals, education spaces, public spaces are seeking out these experiences because neurodiversity is so prevalent in society. We all kind of have at some point in time a sensory need. It's just whether you have kind of the intrinsic ability to cope with those experiences, or if you don't have those abilities to be able to kind of internally cope, you need supportive environments that kind of help provide that cushion. And so this is looking at, we kind of took all the names of the project names off and stuff. This is really just to kind of show proof of concept. So this is looking at ways that you can do landscape design and planning where you're designing for both hyposensitive kind of sensory seekers and then hypersensitive folks that kind of need a break from all the action. And the space between is really a gradient of space. So it's a gradient of activity over time, so that one goes from basically public spaces to a gradient of private, more secluded spaces. You don't really want to put a secluded space or a decompression hut right next to a play area where you're trying to isolate sound in the decompression hut. And then this is looking at kind of general garden circulation, still providing kind of spokes and webs off of that main spine. So it really kind of creates a tree-like pattern where the best approaches to inclusive design and designing for neurodiversity are providing flexibility, choice, and controllability of those environments. And so by giving a series of varying spaces of scale and sensory need and use, and then the ability to control those environments for the individual, somebody that on either end of the sensory kind of need will naturally gravitate to the environment that they feel most comfortable in. So it's really just providing, opportunities for both, and then gradient between those activities, so that there's natural transition spaces and there's natural interactivity between the different users. So we've got kind of seating with shade, stage. Let me minimize my. We've got a stage area, a large play feature, ramp with play, younger children playing, decompression hut. And so I was kind of brought on just for a consultation with Tony and Todd, and a lot of these items were kind of figured out, but some of them were kind of shifted around. Like you can see, the large play area is here, decompression hut is over here, and so really just trying to use inclusive design principles, designing for neurodiversity principles of kind of sensory need to figure out the spatial arrangements of each of these spaces. So one, this is kind of the upper garden. We provide opportunities for all different types of activities, plant archway, garden canopies, connections to nature with butterflies, kind of meandering plant paths, so you can choose your own adventure. And then this is kind of the lower area where you've got the larger play feature. The decompression hut isn't on this page, but it's kind of a smaller, similar design feature. And so there's a connection between the two, but one is a large play feature for kind of sensory seekers, or for children that want to play. And then the decompression hut is a similar design language, and smaller, to provide that sense of scale and comfort. And then this is the beautiful work that our lighting team did for kind of night, very reminiscent of like bioluminescence and natural kind of lighting levels. The team really tried to mimic kind of natural light that you experience at night. And then this is another project that we collaborated on, and my collaboration, what's been really wonderful is I'm not 100% on the project team, but I just have a meeting with Tony and Todd, and we go through kind of inclusive design principles, and then it's kind of a nice check-in, a nice touch point, and then we're able to kind of check the design features as well, and make sure that these spaces are inclusive as possible for all users. So this was kind of a small garden space. We've got a decompression hut, music and movement, kind of at the entry. And as you progress further, it gets more secluded and more kind of smaller in scale. And so Tony and Todd, the team, did an excellent job kind of arranging the spaces for activities. So the decompression hut is kind of further back. The music and movement is kind of up front. And then that also plays out with how the landscape kind of supports that. So around the decompression hut, the landscape is bermed up to provide that already feeling of kind of embrace and support. Whereas the music and movement areas are kind of open and lend itself to discovery. And then these are some great slides about talking about the developmental benefits of the Cascada bells. Basically, it's we've got a that's part of the music and movement area. Soft planning for kind of engagement of physical play, sensory touch. The sensation of having your feet on soft planting and still being able to engage in that sensory discovery play, using talk tubes as kind of an interactive method, and then the combination of rocking chairs as well to kind of also mimic kind of the natural rhythm of motion as well. And then this is just showing the decompression hut. It's kind of encased in plants as they grow up the sides. The first iteration of the decompression hut, the coloring was kind of a reddish color, and we opted for a more subdued color for the decompression hut. It still provides an opportunity for a monument to occur at this location, but the introduction of red is kind of a dysregulating color, so you generally don't want to use that in a space that you're decompressing in. And then this is the last slide. So Tony and I, we were selected every year. Smith Group does exploration grant, research grant. 5 are selected nationally. I think 20 teams applied. And so we're developing an entire Designing for Neurodiversity toolkit called SHINE. Stands for Sustainable, Holistic, Inclusive, Neurodiverse Environments. And it's really, we're trying to engage in kind of the very first touch point of a project where you're getting stakeholders, and so we always want to make sure that neurodivergent perspectives of different socioeconomic backgrounds and cultures are represented, and they're part of the design process. Their input is given right out of the gate at the very first start of the project, and that already because of that input, that already starts in the spatial planning, and so that's already baked in to the design process. So that's what we're trying to implement here at Smith Group. And
awesome. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. That was an awesome primer for different sensory needs and how that can be applied to a design. Next up, we have Sarah. Is your presentation ready? Awesome. Take it away.
Sure is. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Oppenheisen. I am the Director of Interiors at HOK San Francisco. And I've been part of this neuroinclusion research for about the last 6 years. And all of this research at HOK started with a question from one of our clients that was, how do you design for someone who is autistic? So I think you're going to see a lot of parallels between my presentation today and what Ryan just went through. And our research really started with corporate interiors. However, the more we've dug into this, the more it's expanded into other markets that HOK is involved in, including aviation, sports and rec, and of course, landscape as well. So I think a lot of these principles overlap. All of this research is available on HOK's website for anyone to go and look at. So you'll have all these links. But all of this information, we believe that all ships rise. And so having all that information out there is a really great thing. As part of our research, we've learned that 1 in 5 people is neurodiverse, but less than 50% know it. And those individuals who do identify on the neurodiverse scale are in really great company. These are out-of-the-box thinkers. They are problem solvers. But what we realized is that the World Health Organization a few years ago came out with this definition that the point of interaction between an individual and the environment is the problem, because people they come to a space with impairments, right? Those may be that they might be physical impairments, they might be the way they perceive different spaces, they might be on the neurodivergent spectrum. But when an environment is not designed to support them, that's when the disadvantage occurs. So we believe everyone is somewhere on this neurotypical or neurodivergent scale, right? And as Ryan had already pointed out, there are people who are hypersensitive that want less of the sensory stimuli versus those who are hyposensitive that want more. And so when we're designing spaces, we need to make sure that we're designing for all of those people. Sensory distractions, which include sound, smells, and visual clutter, plus the cognitive distractions, which includes loss of focus and discomfort, really leads to that loss of engagement, loss of productivity, and the misalignment within the space. So we've done lots of surveys of different individuals. Some of them have been focused purely on individuals who have identified as neurodivergent versus those who identify as more neurotypical. But we presented just a little bit of that research here today, that it's quite fascinating that if you are hypersensitive or highly sensitive in the space, it generally tends to be auditory. It's sound within spaces, followed very closely by visual. Men tend to be less sensitive to touch and smells. 3/4 of people tend to have a heightened sensitivity to sound, but 62% are visual distractions. And if you are autistic specifically, there's a lower threshold for that sensory stimulation. Interestingly enough, if you are hypersensitive, it's the same two issues that are top of mind. It's the auditory and visual that are the biggest distractions. Women need more visual stimulation than men. They're more impacted by visuals than acoustics. And then a third of these respondents needed a higher percentage of auditory and visual stimulation within the space. So when you're designing a space that has these competing issues, how do we go about designing that? This is one of our favorite quotes from our research, just that autistic people who are canaries in a coal mine, their needs actually aren't different than others. They're just intense and more specific. So I've got a few design strategies, operational strategies, and individual strategies. Not going to go through every single one of these today, but we developed these ideas about how individuals, organizations, and designers can all have a positive impact on those who are on the neurodivergent scale. Option and choice and agency for option and choice is always the number one thing that we push forward with from a design strategy standpoint, and I've got a little bit more in this presentation about that later. And then from an operational standpoint, like organizations need to be on board with presenting these or getting on board with these ideas as well. So awareness training, flexible work policies, all of these things that support individuals will be very helpful. And then individual adjustments. There's lots of things that you as an individual can do in order to help with the overall sensory experience. So we've identified these 6 modalities of work, or the 6 C's, which are concentrate, contemplate, commune, create, congregate, and convivial or social spaces. And the idea here is that whenever you can within a space, that you're providing spaces that both appeal to those who are hypersensitive or need less distraction, and those who are hyposensitive, who need to fidget or move or have all of the crazy colors and textures and sounds that help support their work. But when you're laying out spaces, as Ryan had noted, you don't want to have the very social spaces right next to quiet spaces, because that's conflicting. And so when we're thinking about, in this case, laying out interior space, keeping the social spaces and the concentration spaces further apart within a typical floor plate, but it could be in a landscape environment as well. We've also got some ideas here about, okay, designing an individual space. What are the things that you can do within one space that provide the stimulation or lack thereof for both hyposensitive and hypersensitive in the same spaces? So in this example, we provided that there's areas for doodling and drawing, and spaces with tactile elements and all of those good things right alongside nature and calming elements in a concentrative space. But then in a communal space, we'll have, again, nature and plants, but there's still some opportunities for semi-shielding and circulation for those who are hypersensitive or who are the hyposensitive, and those who are hypersensitive can have opportunities for pacing, movement, fidgeting, all of those good things. So we believe that there's a really compelling business case for designing for neurodiversity, because when we design for the extremes, we benefit the mean, and this helps address mindfulness, health, safety, and well-being within all spaces.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your presentation. It sounds like it's a great point to make, that whether or not you're neurodivergent, you can really benefit from having all these options in a space. Next up, we have April. Your presentation is ready. Take it away.
Hey. Hi, everybody. I'm honored to be here, of course. Let me share my screen. Okay. So I just want to introduce myself. I'm a student, or I should say I was a student. I'm walking this Friday. Our commencement is on Friday, and I'm graduating with a Master in Landscape Architecture and a Master in City and Regional Planning degrees. I also have a background in photography. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts. So I come to design with that kind of sensibility. So I'm really interested in the way that designers can create more equitable and inclusive college campuses. So I focus on higher education by designing for students who have learning disabilities. And I focus specifically on ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I was using my Lee Hall, my main building of studies, as my sort of, I guess you'd say my laboratory. So this is where the students study landscape architecture, art, urban planning, and architecture. So when I began my research, I noticed that the estimated number of college students were, sorry, I'm messing up my slides. There were far more students with ADHD than were actually, like statistically speaking, than were registered for accommodation services. And I just was wondering, like, why is that? I just want to also say, when I presented this, I was honored to present this at the convention in San Francisco in 2022. And afterwards, so many people came up to me telling me their experiences and their frustrations. So it really helped, it resonated with them. And I think that shows the validity and the importance of this research going forward, that I think this is going to become more and more of an issue. So again, my focus was Lee Hall, and this is at Clemson University, Clemson, South Carolina. So again, the amount of students that were registered, and this is statistically using World Health Organization and other sources, the amount of students that are supposedly ADHD is far greater than the amount that are asking for services. So building, design, architecture, this is not necessarily a critique of any of that architecture or design, but I feel like this is about opportunity and creativity. When designers and architects make spaces, they can never fully anticipate how the end user will experience the space they create. But I think if we can raise awareness and we keep that in mind from the beginning, we can have far more inclusive spaces. So a lot of statistics. I was looking at why aren't they getting accommodations? So a lot more students that have ADHD are ending up in higher education. And one of the reasons for that is that in the US, the K through 12 public schools require students who have learning disabilities to receive accommodations. So that means more of them are doing well in school, or doing well enough, and they have that confidence to go ahead when they graduate and apply for college. A lot of people in the past would have just been said, well, you're not college material, you can't focus. Now they're getting that help, so they're able to go to college. And that's good, except once they get there, they don't have that support anymore. That's not required in higher education. So not only do they have this brand new experience they're trying to navigate, but then they have less accommodations, and then they have a built environment that is not necessarily helping at all. And in some cases, it can be a barrier to their education. So we have like 94% of students in K through 12 getting help, and in higher education is only 17%. So fewer accommodations, adjusting to the normal, going to college for the first time, new housing, all that new stuff, and then on top of that, this built environment that's just not made for them. So we know about the built environment, and we can change that. You think about the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, and that's a guide that we have for meeting the needs of people with physical disabilities. But maybe we should think about having a guide for meeting those invisible disabilities. It could be maybe like a LEED certification that people could work for, as an incentive. So from just like a basic, what is ADHD? What is it exactly? Because a lot of people have theories about ADHD, and some people don't think it's a real thing. or that it's like trendy. And it really is just a neurological difference in the brain. So it can present differently for different people. Everybody's different. It can be, you know, maybe you can't manage your time. You have executive functioning problems. I have 2 children that have ADHD, and they're both different. My daughter is like a nonlinear thinker. She's a daydreamer. And my son is a procrastinator who loses focus. When I returned to graduate school, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And I think my thing is like the time. I just don't have that sense of linear time. So that's a problem. But we also have really great attributes too. And we are drawn to these kind of creative professions, design and architecture. So again, the supports are not there. And then we have all these challenges. And these are some of the problems we, you know, any kind of light that's too bright, we have like certain colors, certain noise frequencies, and it can be very specific, which kind of noise. The same with sense. And then if you have the hyperactivity type of ADHD, you can't sit still for too long. You get where you need to get up and move around. So all these things together can, they can interfere with your education. So this is Lee Hall inside and out. It kind of gives you an idea of, you know, it's a modern railing. It's pretty, it's white and not too much as far as landscaping. There's not a lot of green. Somebody there once said to me, well, everybody in Lee Hall has ADHD. And I think part of why I started this research was to prove that's not true. Because it's statistically impossible, right? But studies do show that we're more creative people and we're drawn to these creative fields. So just when we get here, we need a little extra help. There were three tiers that I focused on. The first one is biophilia, and that's that intrinsic human need to be connected to nature. And that really supports the neurodivergent person. I wanted to have like that blade of grass is the biophilia, and then you can always combine the movement with that. So I designed this seat, which is sort of like easy to modify in between a swing. You can roll, you can bounce, you can rock. And it really benefits that, you know, after you're sitting at a desk for a long period of time studying, it's good to get up and move around. So kinesthesia, again, is that sense of body awareness in movement. And outdoor play and restorative nature, or attention restoration theory, that's a chance there to get back, go outside and get back to work again. And that applies also not just in school, but in the work field, in the at the office. So I really was thinking of all those 3 things and play. So I brought those together with this called the playscapes, which are through the college campus. It could be like nodes where you have swings and varied seating, and including perches for climbing, or you just be hanging around. You install them under these existing trees so that when they climb up there, it's a space for retreat. It's calm and quiet if you need it. You can look down. You have that feeling of safety under the branches. You're secure and you can observe the activity. And then once you feel balanced and you feel more restored, you know, you have that solitary time, and then you can also have a little social time. And so that goes back to the stimulating, because you do go back and forth, I think, between the 2. And it's also movement based because you're going to climb up there. But I've also put a ramp on one side so it's accessible for everybody, for the most people possible. So this would be like a reset. You'd go outside and reset and then come back and be able to work again. And also, you got to bring the outdoors in. And I know people don't often think of landscape architects in the interior spaces, but that's just another place we can add more green. So just bringing the biophilia, the movement and the play, the movement, tension restoration together, came up with a few different types of play equipment that could be grouped together or singularly and throughout the campus, just to encourage movement. We have like a hillside slide and a swing. You can climb or just lounge. And of course, I wanted to make the swing where it could come down to ground level and you could just roll on it if you had mobility issues, so it would be accessible for everyone. So these would be deployed across the campus en masse at locations and in configurations that would change and add more interest. So you'd never know what you'd come across. So it would be unexpected. And I think that we need more joy in unexpected places, bringing the outdoor in and indoor out. And so it's be modular and scalable. This could work in a corporate campus or in a city or some kind of metropolitan area. And it would be fun, because we need more of that. We need fun, more fun in our lives. So when there's not services, I think, again, the services aren't there. We are the ones that can bridge the gap. We design the built environment. We can add that support so that students won't have to ask for it because it's built in. And I think they deserve to pursue their educational dreams. With biophilia, movement, and outdoor play in college campuses, I think we can really support ADHD students, and we can build a more equitable campuses for everyone, designing more thoughtfully with more empathy, and includes all type of learners so that all students feel included. I think that is my last slide. I just want to say that life is not as serious as we all make it out to be sometimes, and that we should have more fun. Thank you.
Thank you, April. ADHD is a lot of times there's a lot of misconceptions out there still. So it's great to hear that side of the research and how it relates to how we can support and design. Awesome. And finally, last but not least, we have Macy Nelson. Take it away.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. I think it's great that I actually came last because my background is in landscape architecture. I got my master's of landscape from Kent State University, but effectively I'm a communicator. I carry a lot of titles with me, as you can see listed on the screen, but that's mostly because I study and travel around the world talking about how landscape, built environment, and access come together, but communicating design efforts. So all this wonderful research that we've seen today, I get to talk about it so that way we can, be better at showing the value and showing why it needs to be done. So I'm the other end of the spectrum on that. But speaking of spectrum, the reason I do a lot of this work focusing on that is because I identify as autistic. Which is the next slide. Okay, great. So I disclose my neurotype because I have the privilege to do so. I feel safe to do so, but I do it also to try to normalize how people can do it, because there are a lot of people who don't feel safe and for various reasons. And I just want to acknowledge that it's very valid. So you being here today is a big part of that. Oh, sorry. So this is about to help others. And my diagnosis came actually as a prompt from my son's diagnosis process. And we were asked to be a part of a study to find those genetic correlations. So I became aware of this later in life, but it wasn't too surprising because I also identify strongly as a nerd. I grew up knowing that I was very nerdy as a person. As you saw in the first image, I like an avid reader. But nerd is not a bad word, not to me anyways, because it's someone who is extremely enthusiastic or knowledgeable about something in particular. And, for me, that means I get to really play around with words because that's what I love to do. So I have fun through words, conversations, readings, writings, and podcasting. That's what I'm probably most known for. So I'm known for my words. And I think I want to help us right now learn how to communicate how we talk about neurodiversity. And so these are the words I would like for us to include in whenever we talk about it, is enthusiasm, or enthusiastic, honest, curious. I'm worried my slide's going to go fast again and I'm rushing. But the thing is, these terms are neutral. They're not supposed to be necessarily positive or negative. What I'd like for you to do is think about how you have had that show up in your life. I'm going to go back to those words, sorry. How these words have shown up in your life and how you've handled when you've ever experienced the extremes of these things, right? Have you ever been overly enthusiastic, overly honest, overly curious about something? And then how did you accommodate for that? So this is how I like to start off the conversation about accommodations and why we even do this design work for inclusion, is because accommodations help individuals express and access the worlds that they're living and participating in, right? It creates a dialogue for them to show everyone else what they're experiencing. And that is the basis to me about what accessibility is like. So when I'm going around the world talking about accessibility in built environment, it's really allowing us to be creative and curious about what accessibility could be. And it opens up the conversation to not just how we think of accessibility through, ADA, but also culturally. And that is rooted in communication, which is what I do. So if we are thinking about accessibility, we're thinking about being communicative, and you have a baseline. Usually most of us do. I use words, but music and art are also valid forms of communication. And it really helps you find your community. So if you are communicating and making an effort to communicate with other people, it can lead to just involving yourselves in community. Like now, you are all here trying to involve yourselves in a community and how to accommodate for them, or maybe you want to help yourself, help others, help colleagues, but you're trying to gain a level of understanding that doesn't necessarily exist very well in the foundation of our practices. Best case scenario, we do understand each other, but I would say from today, it's like, how do we understand each other a little bit better? Having an overarching goal of understanding everything isn't really logical, but learning how to talk about it helps us get there and build a sense of belonging for ourselves when doing this work in order to engage, but also it allows for us to help foster a sense of belonging for those who have traditionally not felt involved or a part of the work, which is actually a big part of why I do as much communication and outreach as I do, because talking to students and talking to other professionals, since I am more of a public figure than someone who's attached to an institution, they'll share their experiences about how misunderstandings have led to it, like, impair their mental health. And that has tied into my own autistic experience and how those things have hurt my well-being and others as well, because identifying how to communicate what you need, what accommodations you need, that is not an easy thing to do, and it takes time. So it's important for us to care about each other's well-being as well, not just from a economic standpoint of losing people to other fields, but also from a cultural, emotional incentive. So I use the word non-imposter here because it's a lot to say, like, oh, I feel like I belong. And I think that might be too much pressure. I think it's important to say that in some ways people want to belong while acknowledging that you're different. So it's to say, if we can foster an environment where we're able to understand each other better, it makes a nice middle ground. To me, I'm like, I'd rather us have the middle ground rather than trying to say, like, oh, you belong here, you should feel perfectly comfortable here, but allowing people to have dialogue to say why I may never feel 100% comfortable somewhere, and that is okay. Also, I did a episode on imposter syndrome with my brother, who's a clinical psychotherapist, and he kind of broke down the feelings around imposter syndrome, and that turned into a talk at the national conference and this past fall, and that is actually available now free for ASLA members if you want to do that, because it's for Mental Health Awareness Month, which is May. So it's turned me very much so into an advocate, if you can't tell. I have gained the confidence to talk about this with a lot of people from like a higher level, general conception of what is neurodiversity down to like one-on-one conversations. And it's to say all of that is important. Like we can't do this work without incorporating the communication and advocacy into it. And also highlighting the many experiences that people are having, that it's difficult. Like it's a world of nuance when it comes to communicating these really important topics. But also it's really, really fun for me anyways. So in this picture, I'm showing me and my son on my shoulders, engaging with an olive tree, because this is how we are doing that, right? Like it's a sensory seeking experience, but it's something that we had to find out for ourselves. It's something that we have to go through experimentation to figure out how do we introduce ourselves to the world. Another word I really want to encourage us to use when talking about neurodiversity is futurist. We want to be here in the future. We want to be included in the future. And that means we want time to be a part of the conversation of how long does it take for us to feel included? Like those are just parts of the conversation that we need to have. And then as I've shown you, this is my son, and I feel like we're creating a world for landscape nerds 2.0. So my son also loves being outside and also shares a love of words, as I do, as you can see written all around him. But that is essentially like a very cute way to end the presentation, talking about why communication is so important, because as much as research and boards that we create, communicating is such a spectrum as well, that we have to have a lot of people around us supporting the design work through communications. So that's my end of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Macy. I think as designers, designing all these accommodations, and it is part of advocacy, and that was an awesome presentation. Because we are short on time, I'd like to move into the discussion portion. So we have the chat function, and we also have, if you would like to raise your hand to speak for anything, comments, questions, floor is open.
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah, from Marissa. If we include a decompression hut, and this is actually when Ryan was creating his giving his presentation with the decompression hut, how do you label it as such, Ryan? And if it is a space that everyone wants to play inside, but is specifically designed for those needing downtime. So I guess it's about programming and how people could find this programming when they are using the space. And Ryan, you could maybe talk about it, and anyone else who wants to discuss it.
Yeah. I think it's hard to control the environment all the time. We're really just trying to provide the most amount of opportunity for the most amount of people, and to provide like an equitable playing field to do so. And so you can't always control if a child that doesn't have sensory needs is going to be in a decompression hut. It still might be supportive for them. They might need it in a different way. I think you can also kind of control a little bit about kind of the adjacencies, and so maybe it's used a little less because it's off the kind of adjacency to the major play areas or whatever. But I think as designers, we just try to give about like as much choice and flexibility as we can, and provide the opportunity for equal access. I think decompression huts don't have to be designed exclusively for people with sensory needs. They can be supportive and helpful for everyone. And Macy, when you kind of spoke, it really reminded me, I had to do some pretty serious advocacy for my sons as part of their IEP. And I follow a number of folks on Instagram and podcasts. And one thing that I think really helps is just like you said, the use of our kind of words and language. And there's examples that I heard from kind of a speech therapist and advocate that basically just by changing a couple words in the sentence, it changed it from focusing the conversation on the deficits and the disability of an individual versus the ability, and kind of more switch the conversation more to support and how we can, kind of support the current need, but then also elevate kind of the progress to the future. And so I think, when we're looking at kind of design and how we do that, I think it is important to design for deficits and kind of the spectrum of need. But, I think if we look at it from an opportunity of like, we're providing a number of flexibilities based off of, real user input from, neurodivergent individuals and, all across kind of the support need. I think if you just do kind of those three things, you get most of the way there, and you can't always control, who's going to use the space, but to provide equal, equitable access, I think is the most important part to create an inclusive environment. And that's just my thought on it.
Thank you, Ryan. If anyone else would like to ask a question, Betsy asked, is it being recorded? Yeah, Betsy, we actually will have this video on our website, and Laura, the admin for our chapter, will be publishing it. So you may share it with leaders and city staff. Any other questions that the participants want to ask each other, or anyone in the audience would like to ask? We have a couple minutes here. Really great presentations by our participants. They were all in depth and amazing in their own ways.
I have a question, just to the point of like in the boards and everything that was shown, all the research, because I was talking about words, even using the term like decompression, I'm curious if, because like this could be an interdisciplinary opportunity. I know like an occupational therapist says like, can we do blank differently? Like whatever the goal is, right? So if it's like, oh, there's a decompression place. So if, even though that's called the decompression hut, is there an opportunity to say like, if every place, or there's a lot of places that could be used as decompression, but they're just not labeled as such, but maybe we get tied to the labels of what these places do because of the board process, right? Because of the way that we have to label plans and that, but is there a way to have like multiple labels on something to help that? Because I think it's a great question. Like if some people want to use it because they know it's a decompression hut, but if it's also if there's something else that is also used for decompression, can that be highlighted in some way or coded in some way? So if you can identify the need for decompression, but there are other places, even though it's not the hut, Yeah,
that's a really good point, Missy. And it gives more opportunities. So it's not just like a singular experience. And so, that also provides more equitable and equal access to varying need. Because, somebody might not need like a decompression hut, like an isolated element, or they might just need like a physical squeeze of like a canoe that's kind of tight or something, like there's different strategies of different scales that I think, providing more than one kind of singular design space for that kind of need is a really good point.
Well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Macy, for that. I think programming, it's a complex issue, but I think the more we have people in tune with these topics and needs for our neurodiverse population, the better. And I, with that, want to invite you all to our in-person symposium, our first symposium of ASLA Northern California chapter. It will be in person June 8th. And so we plan to have a part 2 to this topic, and there could be more parts as well. But I just want to invite everyone who's local to that, and you'll take a look at our programming online, and you'll also, if you receive our newsletters, we'll see that published. Again, thank you all for participating and for being here today on behalf of Northern California chapter of ASLA, and that concludes our event today. Thank you so much.